Mic test, testing 1, 2, 3, mic test. That's what I thought too. Oh. Okay. Okay. Should we test? Should we test the sound? Okay.
Hey, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Palelai. For those of you who are here for the first time, we are indeed very pleased and grateful that Phra Ajaan is back again after the pandemic. And it's been a long period of absence, but I think we've all had the opportunity to watch him over Facebook Live. Reason why we are meddling with the equipment there is because we are live streaming as well. Okay. Now, afterwards, after the session, the talk is over and you've got questions, please do make use of a mic so that the people on live stream can hear you. Okay. Right. Without further ado, I'd like to invite Phra Ajaan to give us his Dhamma discourse. Sadhu.
Testing the microphone. Can you hear me? Hear me in the back? Okay, good. How's this? My voice tends to disappear in microphones. Sometimes I leave a message on a phone and they say, "Are you there? Are you there?" So if you can't hear me, raise your hand. Okay. Let's start with meditation. Get in a comfortable position. Your hands in your lap, facing forward, your eyes closed. Start with thoughts of goodwill. Metta. Goodwill is a wish for happiness, true happiness, which means a happiness that comes from inside. And because it comes from inside, your true happiness doesn't have to conflict with anyone else's true happiness, which means that you can make goodwill a universal attitude for all beings without limit and without conflict. Think for a minute where happiness comes from. It comes from your actions. Happiness comes from your actions. So if you wish true happiness for yourself, the attitude you should have is, may I understand the causes for true happiness and be willing and able to act on them. When you have goodwill for others, you hope that they will understand the causes for true happiness and be able to act on them. So you're not saying simply, may you be happy doing whatever you're doing. If you're doing unskillful things, may you stop doing those unskillful things. May you see the error of your ways and start acting skillfully instead. That's an attitude you can have without any hypocrisy. So start with goodwill for yourself. Tell yourself, may I be happy, may I find true happiness inside. And then extend the same thought to others. Start with people who are close to your heart, your family, your very close friends. May they find true happiness too. And then extend that thought out in ever widening circles to people you know well and like. To people you like, even though you don't know them so well. To people you're more neutral about. And to people you don't like. Remember that the world would be a much better place if everyone could find true happiness inside. Spread thoughts of goodwill to people you don't even know. And not just people, living beings of all kinds. East, west, north, south, above and below, out to infinity. May we all find true happiness in our hearts. Now bring your attention to your breath. Take a couple of good, long, deep in and out breaths. And notice where you feel the breathing process in the body most clearly. Because when we speak of breath, it's not just the air coming in and out through the nose. It's the movement of energy in the body that allows the air to come in and to go out. It allows the body to move. Notice where that energy is clearest. And let's settle your attention there. Stay with each breath as it comes in, each breath as it goes out. And notice if long breathing feels comfortable. If it does, you can keep it up. If not, you can change. You can try shorter breathing, more shallow, faster, slower, heavier, lighter. Or in long, out short, in short, out long. See what rhythm and texture of breathing feels best for the body right now. If you're feeling tired, you may want to breathe in a way that's more energizing. If you're feeling tense, breathe in a way that's more relaxing. If your mind wanders away from the breath, just let that thought go. And you'll be right back at the breath again. If thoughts go out again 10 times, 100 times, just drop them 10 times, 100 times. Keep on coming back. Each time you come back, reward yourself with a breath that feels especially good. So that the mind will be more and more inclined to want to come back. If there are any pains in your body, don't focus attention there. Focus instead on the parts of the body that can be made comfortable by the way you breathe. Now, as the breath gets comfortable, there is a tendency sometimes to drop the breath and focus on the comfort, in which case you lose the foundation for your concentration. So to counteract that tendency, the next step is to be aware of the whole body as you breathe in, the whole body as you breathe out. And a good way to build up to that whole body awareness is to go through the body first, section by section, to familiarize yourself with how the breath feels in different parts of the body. And a good place to start is down around the navel, down around the abdomen. Locate that part of the body in your awareness. Where do you feel it right now? And watch it for a while as you breathe in, breathe out to see what rhythm of breathing feels good there. If you feel any tension or tightness in that part of the body, allow it to relax so that no new tension builds up as you breathe in, and you don't hold on to any tension as you breathe out. Now move your attention up to the solar plexus, the area right in front of your stomach, and follow the same 3 steps there. 1, locate that part of the body in your awareness. 2, watch it for a while as you breathe in and breathe out to see what rhythm of breathing feels good there. And then 3, if there's any sense of tension or tightness in that part of the body, allow it to relax. Now bring your attention to the middle of the chest and follow the same 3 steps there. And now bring your attention to the base of the throat and follow the same steps there. Now bring your attention to the middle of the head. As you breathe in, think of the breath energy coming in, not only through the nose, but also through the eyes, the ears, in from the back of the head, down from the top of the head, going deep into the brain. And as you breathe out, think of it radiating out from the head in all directions, dissolving away any patterns of tension you may feel in the forehead, in your jaws, in the back of the neck. And allowing those patterns of tension to dissolve away. Loud. Now bring your attention to the back of the neck, right at the base of the skull. As you breathe in, think of the breath energy entering there from the back, then going down through the neck, the shoulders, the arms, the hands, out to the tips of the fingers, the spaces between the fingers. And as you breathe out, think of it radiating out from all those parts of the body into the air. Now, keeping your attention focused on the back of the neck. This time, as you breathe in, think of the breath energy entering there and then going down both sides of the spine, down to the tailbone. And as you breathe out, think of it radiating out from the entire back into the air. Move your attention down to the base of the spine. As you breathe in, think of the breath energy entering there, and then going down through the hips, the legs, down to the tips of the toes. And as you breathe out, think of it radiating out from all those parts of the body into the air. Now that completes one cycle in the survey of the body. If you're meditating on your own, you could go through the body as many times as you like until you're ready to settle down. But for right now, choose any one spot in the body that seems most congenial, most comfortable to focus on. Allow your attention to settle there, and then from that spot to spread out to fill the whole body. So you're aware of the whole body, breathing in, the whole body breathing out. Now, there may be a tendency for you, the range of your awareness to shrink as you breathe out. So keep reminding yourself each time you breathe in, whole body. Each time you breathe out, whole body. And allow the breath to find whatever rhythm feels good. Your main duty right now is to try to maintain the sense of centered but broad awareness. Like the light of a candle in an otherwise dark room. The flame of the candle is in one spot, but its light fills the room. This centered but broad awareness is healing for the body and healing for the mind. Think of it as being like a cream that you would put on a rash. You don't put the cream on and then just immediately wipe it off. You put the cream on and you let it stay so it can do its work. In the same way, this centered but broad awareness can provide you with a good foundation. So let it be steady. Give it some time to make sure that this foundation is solid. And then it can do its work on your mind. Now I invite you to continue meditating while I give the talk. There's a there's a there's a passage in the canon. Oops. There's a passage in the Canon where the Buddha is going to teach her son, Rahula, how to meditate. Rahula is asked to learn how to do breath meditation. And before the Buddha teaches him breath meditation, he teaches him some preliminary exercises. And the very first one is make your mind like earth. People can throw disgusting things on the earth, but the earth doesn't react. You could pour perfume on the earth and the earth wouldn't be pleased. You could pour garbage on the earth and the earth wouldn't be upset. This is basic instruction in teaching the mind how to be non-reactive. Some people interpret it as being non-judging as well. And this is basically what you would call mindfulness 1.0. Just not reacting. Whatever comes up, you note that it's there, but you don't react to it. And for many people, that's where mindfulness practice stops, or that it just continues at that level. But the Buddha didn't continue there. He went on from there to teach a more proactive kind of mindfulness. Because you have to remember that mindfulness doesn't mean being aware. It means holding something in mind. You can hold in mind the idea that you don't want to react, but the mindfulness is in the process of memory. And then as the Buddha goes on to teach mindfulness, it's a much more proactive thing. He describes the role of mindfulness when mindfulness takes charge of the mind as seeing that there are skillful qualities that have not yet arisen in the mind. You try to give rise to them. If they have given rise in the mind, you try to make sure they don't fall away. So instead of just watching things coming and going, the duty of mindfulness there is to remember, make sure that good things come and make sure they don't go. This fits in with the Buddha's analogies for mindfulness, one of which is the gatekeeper at a fortress. This is a fortress at the edge of the country. The enemies can come in. So the gatekeeper has to be very careful to make sure he recognizes who's coming in, who he doesn't want to come in. Skillful qualities are allowed into the fortress. Friends are allowed into the fortress. Enemies are not allowed in. And the gatekeeper doesn't just sit there. He actively looks, makes decisions, keeps the enemy out, lets the friends in. There's another analogy the Buddha gives for mindfulness, which is a goad. And most of you are not farmers. You may not know what a goad is. A goad is a long pole with a sharp end. And they would use it with water buffalo. When the water buffalo is plowing the field to plant the rice, if the buffalo was going off to the right too far, you would stick it in the side with the goad to make sure that it would turn away in the other direction. If it goes too far to the left, you would stick it in the left. So mindfulness doesn't just sit there passively. It has an active role in reminding you what should and should not be done. This is the role of mindfulness 2.0. And I'd like to talk tonight about what mindfulness 2.0 is. But first, I want to address that issue of non-reactive and non-judging mind. The fact that the Buddha wants you to be non-reactive, that's true. That is an accurate depiction of what he's teaching in that first step. And he wants you to be non-reactive as you go through the practice. But non-judging, that's another issue entirely. Because many times the Buddha said, your role as a practitioner, your role as a meditator, is to learn how to use your powers of judgment wisely. For example, when you're going to choose a teacher, you have to take time to judge the teacher properly. You're looking for someone who is knowledgeable, someone who speaks the truth, and someone who is compassionate. As you ask these questions when you're meeting a potential teacher. One, does this teacher teach the teaching that is deep and inspiring, that really reflects on deep knowledge in the teacher himself or herself. If not, find another teacher. The second question is, would this teacher claim to know things that he or she doesn't know on the basis of greed or aversion and delusion? And you find the teacher claiming to know things that he or she doesn't know, find another teacher. Third, would this teacher get someone to do something that is not in that person's best interest? Again, if the answer is yes, find another teacher. You want someone who's knowledgeable, truthful, and compassionate. This is going to take time. You can't just watch one or two YouTube videos and decide whether someone is truthful and knowledgeable. You have to get to know the person. But you remember, when you're learning the Dhamma, you're placing your heart, your mind in someone else's hands. So you want to make sure that you choose the right person. But your powers of judgment don't end there. Once you found someone who does pass the test, you listen to that person's Dharma, you think about it, you decide that it makes sense, that it's inspiring. And then the Buddha says you give rise to a desire to practice. And then based on that desire, you start judging, in this case, not judging the teacher, but judging yourself. To what extent do your actions fall in line with that teaching? And to what extent do they not? When you see there are areas where they don't fall in line with that teaching, then you try to do what you can to bring them in line. This is where the effort comes in the practice. And the Buddha says again and again, you have to use your powers of judgment, both in judging the teacher and in judging yourself. And in judging yourself, it's not just one time after listening to the Dharma that you judge your actions. The Buddha says you commit to the practice and then you reflect. In committing, you keep doing it, and then you reflect. Are you getting good results? Are they satisfactory? Is the mind calming down? Do you begin to know yourself more clearly? Do you find that you're doing fewer and fewer things that are unskillful? That's a sign that your practice is going well. If you judge your practice on reflection, realize that it's not going well, what are you going to do? You have to change what you're doing. Commit again. Try something new and then commit again. Reflect again. So it's a constant process of commitment and reflection, using your judgment to get your actions more and more in line with the principles of what's skillful and what's not. This is the role of mindfulness in Mindfulness 2.0. We're going to think about some of the implications of this. The Buddha would teach what he said were his categorical teachings, the teachings that are true and beneficial in all cases. There are only two of his teachings that qualify. One is the teaching is that skillful actions should be developed, unskillful actions should be abandoned. And that's actions in terms of body and speech and mind. The second categorical teaching is the Four Noble Truths. Suffering is clinging to the aggregates. That should be comprehended. Its cause is craving, which should be abandoned. The third noble truth is the cessation of suffering, which should be realized, and you do that by developing the path, which is the fourth noble truth. Now notice, both of those categorical teachings have imperatives. They give you, not only describe something, but they also tell you what to do. And they divide reality into two sorts. In other words, there's skillful things, unskillful things. The skillful things should be developed, the unskillful things should be abandoned for the purpose of putting an end to suffering. And this is where your powers of judgment have to come in, to distinguish what is skillful, what is not. The Buddha said that if people couldn't develop skillful qualities and abandon unskillful ones, he wouldn't have taught this. The implication there is that you do have some freedom of choice in the present moment as to what to do. Sometimes you'll hear that the Buddha taught that we have no freedom of choice, that you simply have to accept your past karma, you can accept causes and conditions. And if you can accept things and not react, then you're going to be okay. The Buddha described that as one of the worst possible wrong views that there is out there. He said, if you couldn't make a change in your behavior, the idea of a path of practice wouldn't make any sense. So we have to assume the fact that we do have freedom of choice to some extent. And the practice is what takes advantage of that freedom. Secondly, he said, if developing skillful qualities and abandoning unskillful ones didn't lead to happiness, again, he wouldn't teach that. The implication is that whatever effort is required to develop skillful qualities and to abandon unskillful ones is worth it. Here again, you're sometimes told that, well, try to find a relaxing path, a path that is easy, because after all, nirvana is the ultimate happiness, so the path there should be an easy path. That's not necessarily the case. To get there is going to require work. The Buddha gives an example. You're trying to get milk out of a cow. Now, if you twist the horn, you're not going to get any milk. You twist the horn harder, you're not going to get any milk. You're going to harass the cow and you're going to get yourself tired to no purpose. Now, some people say, well, just stop twisting the horn and you'll be more relaxed. Okay, the cow feels better, you feel better, but you're still not getting any milk. You have to find, well, what part of the cow do I pull on? So you pull different things. You pull the tail, no, that doesn't work. You pull the legs, that doesn't work. Finally, you pull the udder, you get the milk. So the question is not so much, should you just relax and let things follow their own course? We are trying to find an end to suffering, and it's going to require work, but it requires work at the right spot. So the question is, okay, what is skillful and what is not skillful? I'd like to look at a few areas where we're told that a quality is always skillful, and it points out the Buddha says it's not always skillful. For example, with acceptance, we're told that we should learn how to accept things as they are. But when the Buddha himself talked about acceptance, he only talked about it in terms of very few things. And the primary use of the word accept or acceptance is atiwasa or atiwasana in Pali, is when the Buddha would accept invitations for meals. But the important areas where he teach acceptance were three. One is when someone has died, you accept the fact that they've died. Two, you accept the fact that there's going to be physical pain in your life. And then three, you accept the fact that people are going to be speaking harsh words, unpleasant words to you. Now, in accepting these things, the Buddha doesn't say simply just put up with it. In the case of someone's death, he says you reflect on the fact that this happens to everyone. In other words, he wants to teach you that even though you accept these things, you learn how not to suffer from them by actively thinking in new ways. The first thing is you realize that this happens to everyone. Everyone has lost somebody that they love. And so you realize, okay, it's not just me. The universe is not dumping on me or pointing or placing any undue burdens on me. This is something that everybody has to experience. And when you think in those terms, for just a few minutes, you don't have to think very long. Think for just a few minutes, and it gives rise not to a sense of grief, but a sense of compassion. You realize everybody here has lost somebody. Everybody you deal with in the course of your life has lost somebody. So it's much easier to have compassion for them, because you see, this hurts this much for me, it must hurt this much for them. And then based on that compassion, then you learn how to do skillful things. So you don't just sit there with your grief, you learn how to transform it into compassion. And then on the basis of that compassion, you live the rest of your life in a wiser way. In terms of our speech, the Buddha has you reflect in two ways, one of which is, this is the nature of human speech. There's going to be people speaking kind words, people speaking unkind words, people speaking harsh words, people speaking gentle words, people speaking useful words, people speaking useless words, people speaking with goodwill, people speaking with ill will. So when someone teaches you or says something to you that is false, said with ill will, and is harsh, this is nothing out of the ordinary. This is the nature of human speech. So when someone speaks to you like that, it doesn't give you the right to behave with any extraordinary bad behavior. You realize, okay, this is the normal part of the world. If I want to live in a world where there's nothing but kind, truthful, gentle, useful speech, I've found the wrong world. I've got to find another one. Since I'm here, I have to accept this is the nature of the human world. The second way that Buddha has you reflect on speech is that if someone says something harsh, you realize, okay, it just makes contact at the ear, and then it stops. And then so you tell yourself, an unpleasant sound has made contact at the ear, and you let it stop right there. Now, how many times have you thought that way? Usually an unpleasant sound comes in, your immediate thought is, why are they saying that to me? How could they say that to me? How could they disrespect me? And when the Buddha says you do that, you're pulling the sound into your mind. And whatever pain you feel from that point on, after the unpleasant sound has made contact, whatever pain you're feeling there, you were stabbing yourself. So why do you keep stabbing yourself? You say, okay, let that person say that. That's that person's karma. It's not my karma. Let that person have that. Now, the Buddha doesn't say you don't argue with a person. If you can think in ways that do not have anger, but you can respond in an appropriate way, so much the better. But don't wound yourself with the speech. So here again, the Buddha says, even though you have to accept these things, you don't have to suffer. But in order not to suffer, you don't just say, well, I'll just put up with it. You learn how to think in new ways, talk to yourself in new ways that can minimize the suffering. The same with pain. Even though physical pain is an inevitable part of our lives, the Buddha says you don't have to focus on the pain. When he gives instructions on how to deal with feelings, he says you try to breathe in a way that gives rise to a sense of pleasure in the body. This means even though pain may be, say, in your knee or pain may be in your stomach, you don't have to focus there. You can focus on the parts of the body that you can make pleasant by the way you breathe. And once you've learned how to do that, then you can think of that sense of pleasant sensation going through the pain. Ajaan Lee gives some good examples of this. You say there's a pain in your knee. Think of this pleasant sensations you have in another part of the body, running down the body, going down the leg, through the pain and out your foot. Don't let it stop right at the pain. And that way you can begin to dissolve away some of the tension that tends to build up around pain. And then finally, you can look at how you perceive the pain. The Buddha calls this mental fabrication, and in a minute we'll be getting into more detail in what he means by that. But the image you hold in mind will have an important impact on how badly that pain wounds the mind. If you feel that the pain is in the same thing as the body, okay, you feel that the pain has taken possession of the body, you don't have any place where you can stay. But if you realize that the pain is one thing, the body is something else, they live on two different levels of frequency or two different levels of reality. You begin to realize that the mind does have this tendency to take the sense of pain and latch on to some part of the body. But it doesn't have to do that. Prior to that, the pain is one thing, your sense of the body is something else. And if you can learn how to see them as separate this way, holding that perception in mind can make the pain a lot less of a burden. Another way you can look at the pain is to ask yourself, is it a solid, mass of pain that doesn't change? Or does it change? Does it come and go? And you look at it carefully and you begin to realize moments of pain come and go, come and go, come and go. And again, if you hold that perception in mind, it's going to be less of a burden on the mind. And then you can ask yourself the question, when the pain comes, does it come at you or does it go away? Years back, I was here. John King took me to a traditional Chinese doctor over in Jurong. He was going to treat my back. And first he started rubbing oil on my back, which felt nice. And then he started rubbing harder and harder and harder. And my back was getting raw. And then he pulled out these bamboo whisks and started beating me. And my first thought was, okay, what karma have I done? And I realized he was not going to stop. So I said, okay, how can I endure this without suffering from it? And I began to realize that as soon as he hit me, if I perceived that the pain, as soon as the pain hit, I could perceive it as going away, going away, going away. It didn't impinge on the mind. It's like sitting in a train with your back to the engine, and the train is going in this direction. Whatever comes through your range of your sight is going away from you as soon as you see it. The pain doesn't afflict you that much. So you can learn how to perceive pain in different ways that don't afflict you. So that even though you have to accept the fact that there is pain in life, you don't have to suffer from it. So this is an important principle in acceptance. You don't have to accept everything. In fact, the Buddha says there's one thing you don't accept, and that's unskillful states in the mind. Greed arises, pain, aversion arises, delusion arises. You don't just sit there and say, oh, isn't this interesting? This is just the way it is. You say, what can I do to get rid of it? How can I not let this take hold of my mind? And so you have to learn how to think in ways, use your meditation. We'll get into this later, so that the pain doesn't latch on to the mind. So those unskillful thoughts don't latch on to the mind. Those are things you don't accept because they don't have to be there. Pain is inevitable. Once you're born, there's going to be pain. It's part of the contract. You didn't look very carefully at the contract when you got born. And then you discover, oh yeah, there's this. There's pain, there's death, there's illness, there's aging. You learn how to accept those facts, but you don't have to suffer from them. However, unskillful states in the mind, you don't have to accept those. Those are things that can be changed. And that's what the teaching is all about, is how you change the mind so that these things don't take over the mind. Similarly with the issue of contentment. When the Buddha talks about contentment, he's basically having you be content with your material possessions in terms of your food, your clothing, your shelter, your medicine. Is it good enough so that you continue practicing? If so, you have enough. That's what you content yourself with. But again, if unskillful states come into the mind, the Buddha says you don't content yourself there. You learn how to delight in abandoning unskillful states and to delight in developing skillful states in their place. And even with skillful states, he says you don't rest content. There's a passage where he talks about the secret to his awakening. He says it wasn't much. One, it was just putting forth effort. And two, it was not being content with skillful qualities. Years back, I received a letter. I had translated that passage and put it up on Dhamma Talks, Access to Insight. And someone wrote to me and said, this must be a misprint. The Buddha would have you be content with skillful qualities. I said, no, it's in the Pali. You're not content with skillful qualities. As long as there's still any suffering in the mind, you do what you can to put an end to it. It's sort of like saying, okay, I've eaten just one bite of food. I'll just tell myself that I'm full. It doesn't work. You eat, you're full. You eat until you're full. Then you can say, well, then that's enough. So here again, the Buddha has you make a distinction between when you should be content and when you should not be content. You keep on practicing until you prove to yourself what the Buddha taught was true, is that there is an end to suffering. Finally, there's the issue of equanimity. We're often taught that equanimity is a very high-level state of mind. But you have to realize that there are different levels of equanimity, some of which are more skillful than others. And equanimity is never taught on its own. Sometimes it's taught as part of the Brahma Viharas. You develop goodwill, you develop compassion, you develop empathetic joy. And then in cases where no matter how much you wish for other beings to be happy, no matter how much you wish for those who are suffering to end their suffering, no matter how much you wish those who are happy to continue to be happy, there are some people in some cases where it won't happen. That's when you develop equanimity. So equanimity doesn't come first. It has to be built on, and it's part of your practice of compassion, goodwill, and empathetic joy. Similarly with the equanimity and the factors for awakening, it's only one of many factors that you have to develop. As the Buddha points out, equanimity comes in many levels. There's the ordinary garden variety of equanimity, where you simply tell yourself, okay, I'm just not going to react. They're going to say horrible things, they're going to do things I don't like, but I'm just not going to react. That's one level of equanimity. But it's kind of a small-hearted equanimity. You're basically saying, okay, there's nothing I can do, I've got to give up. That can lead to depression. The next level of equanimity that the Buddha recommends is basically that you learn how to develop powers of concentration. Either that or you learn how to develop the insight that gives a sense of joy to the mind. And then based on that joy, then you develop equanimity to things that would otherwise disturb you. But now you've got a fund of well-being inside, which is not threatened by those events. And now in this case, this equanimity is not defeatist and it's not depressed. There was a study they did in Sri Lanka years ago when they interviewed people who were said to be very deep into the Dharma, thinking a lot about inconstancy, stress, not self, impermanence, suffering, not self. And the psychologist came to the conclusion that these people were suffering from a mild depression. They just had basically given up on finding happiness in the world and said, okay, I'll just accept the fact that I can't be happy. I'll have equanimity and be okay. And they said, well, this is depression. The Buddha doesn't teach equanimity without happiness. You have to have a sense of well-being inside. It's like when you're already full from eating your food, and then someone says, well, I'm afraid there's no more food. Doesn't matter because you're already full. This is the kind of equanimity that the Buddha recommends. Even more so when there's the equanimity that comes from awakening. Again, awakening is not equanimity. Awakening is the highest happiness. When you've found that highest happiness, then you can be equanimous about everything else because, again, it doesn't affect your happiness. And then based on that equanimity, you can deal with other people in a much more balanced way. But it's not always the case that equanimity is desirable. The Buddha says there are basically two types of causes for suffering. There's the type that when you just look at it with equanimity, it goes away. In other words, it's like that you have a defilement in the mind that is kind of embarrassed and has a sense of shame. And it's been able to control your mind because you haven't looked carefully at it. But once you turn your full attention to it, it gets embarrassed and goes away. There are other cases in the mind, though, where you have defilements in the mind: greed, aversion, delusion, lust, fear, jealousy. You look at it and it looks right back. It has no sense of shame. In that case, the Buddha says you have to develop what he calls, you have to exert a fabrication. Now, the word fabrication here means sankhara. The Pali term is sankhara. And it means an activity that you do right here in the present moment. I said earlier, the Buddha said that we do have freedom of choice in the present moment. Basically, what's happening is that you've got raw material coming in from the past, but you also have your actions in the present moment as to what you're going to do with that raw material. It's like being a cook. You go into your kitchen, you look in the refrigerator. Sometimes there's good food in the refrigerator, sometimes it's not so good. But if you're a good cook, you can make good food out of anything. Has John King ever told you his story about being a cook in the British Club here in Singapore? It was a secret that he tried to keep. He was hired by the British Club, and one time they were having a fixed price meal, which asparagus soup was one of the dishes. And it turned out more people came than they expected, so they ran out of asparagus soup. So he said, okay, everybody out of the kitchen. And then when they got out of the kitchen, he went into the garbage can, got all the trimmings from the asparagus, put it in the blender, and made a bechamel sauce. And then said, okay, now we have asparagus soup. Nobody knew that they were eating trash. So that's the attitude you want to have as a Dharma practitioner, that whatever comes your way from your past karma, you have the skills in order to turn that into something good. And the skills you have are three. the Buddha calls it bodily fabrication, verbal fabrication, and mental fabrication. Bodily fabrication is the way you breathe. You're perfectly free to breathe in any way you want. And so instead of just breathing any old which way, you know that you can breathe in a way that's comfortable. You know that breathe in a way that's energizing when you're tired, breathe in a way that's calming when you're tense. This is something that you can do. You have freedom of choice in the present moment. The second type of fabrication is verbal fabrication. It's the way you talk to yourself. I've already given some examples about how to talk to yourself about pain, how to talk to yourself about harsh words. It's the way you talk to yourself that's going to make a difference between whether you're going to suffer or whether you're not going to suffer. And finally, there's mental fabrication, which are feelings and perceptions. Feelings here are feeling tones of pleasure, pain, neither pleasure nor pain. Perceptions are the labels you apply to things, how you identify this is this and that is that, and how you talk about what is the value of this and what is the value of that. Again, you have the choice to apply different perceptions to things. You can see this, you've probably seen this in the newspaper. You see a picture of a woman who's scowling, and underneath it, it could say, this is the victim of somebody's cheating her. And then you feel, okay, I understand her scowl because she's scowling because she's been cheated. Or the label could say, this was the person who tried to cheat other people and she's been caught. Now you're going to perceive her in a totally different way. That scowl is going to have a different meaning, right? In the same way, you look at other people, you look at yourself, and the way you place labels on things is going to make a huge difference as to how you react to those things, how you feel about those things, whether they make you suffer or whether they don't make you suffer. Now, both of these approaches, the approach of looking at some things with equanimity and they go away, and looking at other things and realize they won't go away unless you actually actively learn how to fabricate a new experience in the present moment. Those are the two ways you're going to be dealing with the problem of suffering. And so this is why we have to exercise our powers of judgment, is to realizing, okay, which things are the things that we can simply look at, and which things are the way we're going to exercise our powers of fabrication, and how do we exercise those powers of fabrication in the most skillful way. This is where our power of judgment comes in. Now you notice that both of those approaches are going to have to depend on getting the mind in a good solid state of concentration. Because for equanimity to be healthy, it has to be based on a sense of well-being. The best way to gain a sense of well-being is to learn how to develop that sense of well-being through learning how to master concentration. To fabricate your experience in the way you breathe, the way you talk to yourself, the way you hold images and perceptions in your mind. That's going to require a sense of well-being inside as well. Because it's a lot easier to talk to yourself in skillful ways when you're basically feeling good about yourself. If you're not feeling good about yourself, the whole world is a miserable place and everything just goes downhill. But if you can learn how to develop a state of concentration, which also allows you to understand and perceive these processes of fabrication, okay, then you're going to be stronger. This is precisely what the Buddha is teaching in Mindfulness 2.0. When he taught Rahula breath meditation, after giving his initial instructions, he taught him 16 steps altogether. I won't go into all 16 right now, but they include learning how to breathe, aware of your whole body, learning how to breathe, giving rise to a sense of well-being, learning how to breathe in a way where you can gladden your mind, learning how to breathe in a way where you can steady and concentrate your mind, learning how to breathe in the way that helps give rise to insight. These are things you can do simply by the way you breathe. And you learn to understand, you can give rise to feelings of well-being by the way you breathe. So this gives you insight into how you're fabricating your experience here in the present moment, simply as you're sitting here. I mean, you could sit here and make yourself miserable. years back when I was teaching meditation at the monastery, we have what we call the outdoor classroom, which is a place where there's little meditation platforms under the trees. And this one woman brought her friend to meditate. And I remember that particular day. It was a really nice day. The weather was nice, not too harsh. The sun was not too harsh. The air was cool. There was a nice breeze. And I said, well, this is one of the most pleasant meditations I've ever had. And as we finished the meditation, the friend that was brought to there, she opened her eyes. She said, I have never suffered so much in my life. And so it's what you bring to the experience is going to make the difference. So one of the things you bring is learning how to breathe. You get sensitive to how your breathing can have an effect on your mind. Secondly, how you talk to yourself. And again, in the Buddha's meditation instructions on breath, he's teaching you how to talk to yourself. Now you can breathe in a way that's more calming. Now you can breathe in a way where the breath gets more calm. You can breathe in a way that you can be aware of the whole body. When there's a sense of pleasure, the Buddha says, you can allow that pleasure to spread throughout the body in the same way that cooling water spreads throughout a lake. You ask yourself, how do I do that? Well, you learn how to master that skill. And once you've mastered that skill, when you meditate, you can use it anywhere. The skills of meditation are not only for the meditation cushion. Therefore, when you go out into the world, you're dealing with difficult people, you say, I know how to breathe. This person doesn't have to know that I can breathe really comfortably. They can be yelling at me, but I'm blissing out on my breath. That's your secret. And then, of course, there's mental fabrication, which is the perceptions you hold in mind. For example, when I started the instructions here, I said, perceive the breath not just as the air coming in and out through the nose, but also the energy flow in the body. Now you hold that perception in mind. You realize, okay, that I carry that with me all the time. And as you learn how to perceive the chi in your body, wherever you go, you can let the chi flow smoothly. This is a way that you can learn how to be with unpleasant situations, but you don't have to suffer. And the meditation is here to help teach you. This is how you breathe. This is how you talk to yourself. These are perceptions you hold in mind that enable you not to suffer. In fact, you could look at all of the Buddhist teachings, and they basically come down to those three things: how to breathe, how to talk to yourself, what perceptions to hold in mind, so that you don't have to suffer. So this is why you need not just mindfulness 1.0, but mindfulness 2.0 when you're learning how to take a more proactive attitude towards what you're doing, both as you meditate and as you carry the skills of the meditation into your daily life. So that's mindfulness 2.0. I don't know if anyone has mindfulness 3.0, but I'll be interested in any questions that you may have. Glasses on.
I have one question, sir. Okay, in the Thai language, right, they have the word sati, which come from the Pali sati, right? The way it's used, I've seen words using in Thai. The person is being more sober. He said, "I have more sati than you." Sati or they use another context, right? He said that I use my sati to distinguish certain things. Is this the correct way of using the word sati, as in what the Buddha taught?
Okay, sati means basically keeping something in mind. Now, a person who's drunk has trouble keeping things in mind. So a person who's sober would have more sati.
Is that correct?
Yeah. Now, and what was the second example?
To distinguish, I use my sati to distinguish that you are not a bad person.
Okay, in that case, you're using your mindfulness to remember what you've learned about skillful and unskillful people in the past. But then you also need to be alert to notice, okay, what are the signs that I can tell whether this person is a good person or a bad person? So you have to be alert, because mindfulness on its own is not going to tell you.
So when you say alert, right, is it sampajano?
So your sampajanya is alertness.
Okay, I mean in Thai also, right? Sampajano, right? Even somebody write a will, sampajano, that means I have the right mind state. when I'm making this will. Right? Is this correct also?
I don't understand what you're saying.
What I mean is that the word sati sampajanya, right, in Thai, right? If somebody writes something, very serious document, like a will. He said that I'm of sati sampajano when I write this thing. That means he's to say that, to indicate that he's of the right mind state. He's been sober when he's making this will. Is this
Okay.
correct? Consistent with what the Buddha taught?
Okay, you have to remember that the word sati in Thai and the word sati in Pali are slightly different. Sati in Thai means basically you're of a sound mind.
So,
Yeah, because you say if somebody has really maimi sati, and someone doesn't have any sati, they're kind of crazy. Whereas in Pali, sati basically means the ability to hold something in mind. And sampajanya means I know what I'm doing while I'm doing it.
okay, is that consistent with what the Buddha taught? I mean, sampajanya, right? We're talking about sampajanya, right? Supposing sampajanya, like a thief stealing something, he's aware of what he's doing. Versus a child who stole a toy.
Okay, then you have to combine the two of those with a third quality, which the Buddha calls attapa, which is basically ardency. And ardency means you try to do things correctly in line with the Buddhist teachings. Now you can have sati, mindfulness is neutral. You can hold things in mind that are skillful, you can hold things in mind that are unskillful. Sampajanya is also neutral. You know what you're doing. As you rob the bank, that still counts as sampajanya, it still counts as alertness. But it lacks ardency. Ardency is when you try to do things skillfully in line with the Buddhist teachings. Ardency is what makes the other two right.
Okay, maybe a last question now. So since you say that in Thai, right, the word sati actually means a sober mind, right? Is it consistent with what the Buddha taught? Like for example, somebody is very agitated, he said tang sati, establish your
You're
mindfulness.
speaking so fast I can't
I'm
understand.
sorry. So for example, in Thai, right, somebody is very agitated, usually they say tang sati, establish your mindfulness. Is this consistent with what the Buddha taught?
Okay, it's simply, I mean, you've got two different languages. And for those of you who know Thai, every Pali word that goes into Thai gets changed as it goes into Thai.
But actually quite consistent.
Okay, like Vedana in Pali means feeling. Vedana in Thai means that you feel sorry for somebody. Samped Vedana, right? Sanya in Pali means perception. Sanya in Thai means an agreement. Sankhara in Pali, fabrication. Sankhan in Thai means your body. Vijnana in Pali means consciousness. Vinyan in Thai means a spirit or a ghost. So the words change their meaning as they go from one language to the other.
Anyone else has a question?
The way in the back.
Ajahn,
Yes.
may I know if there's a place for harsh words?
Mm.
And another question will be, how should, or rather, what would be the wise way of our attitude and thinking, I believe, when we hear what's going on with the current world affairs? Much that for me, I try to think like they're all causes and conditions, but I also catch myself, lack of a better word, is like blaming a party for being the aggressor, and causing this major provocation and so much suffering. And I know that this doesn't help, so I need to find a way to think more skillfully. Thank you.
Okay. You've asked two questions. The first question is the easier one to answer about harsh words. There was a case one time when the Buddha was asked if he would ever say anything unpleasant. And in fact, the person asking the question meant that as a trick question, because there were cases where the Buddha did say things that people found unpleasant. But if the Buddha said, you know, he would say things that were unpleasant, then this person would say, well, what's the difference between you and ordinary people out there? And if the Buddha said he wouldn't say things that were unpleasant, he did say that Devadatta was going to go to hell. Devadatta didn't like that. And so before answering the question, though, the Buddha said that, okay, there's no categorical answer to that question. And then he gave an example. He said, suppose you have a child who's taken a sharp object in his mouth. What do? Basically, you have to get the object out, even if it means drawing blood, because you don't want the child to swallow the object, because that would be worse. So he said there are times when, out of compassion, you have to say something harsh. So the person, comes to their senses or realizes that it's a dangerous situation. But again, the motivation has to be compassionate, to be skillful. This is the reason why, there's a precept against lying, because you don't lie. The Buddha says you never lie at all. But there's no precept against harsh speech, because there are occasions where harsh speech can be the compassionate speech. As for the attitude you have toward the world, especially the events in the world right now, you have to have a lot of compassion, both for the people who are being the aggressors and for the people who are being oppressed. And then you express that compassion in different ways. I mean, if there's anything you can do to stop the aggression, okay, that's the compassionate thing. Because those people are creating a lot of bad karma for themselves. And as for the oppressed, if there's anything you can do to help lighten their load or lighten their suffering, then you're happy to do that. And if you find yourself in a position where you can't do that, just lots of goodwill. And this is where the Buddha says you have to focus on the areas where you can make a difference. If you keep hitting your head against areas where you cannot make a difference, you're wasting your energy that could be used in areas where you could be of help. But you've got to have goodwill all around. We had a case years back, but I don't know if you remember, there had been a time when there was a big uprising in Bangkok, and then some soldiers were brought in from the border police and fired on the demonstrators. And the king called both sides into the palace and basically read them the riot act. Do you have that phrase in Singapore? To read them the riot act? Okay. And so they both fell from power. And the general who had given the orders to shoot the demonstrators lost his job. And his daughter was attending a university in Bangkok. She had to leave the university, came to America, and entered a university in San Diego, which is right down the road from our monastery. And so the father came to visit her one time. And to make a very long story short, he ended up at the monastery here at Wat Metta. And Ajaan Suwat gave him a very compassionate talk about how to, think about the fact that he had done something that was wrong and had suffered the consequences of it. And Ajaan Suwat basically said to me afterwards, if he hadn't been punished, he wouldn't come to the monastery. And so Ajaan Suwat did not agree with what he had done, but he still had compassion for the guy. So you think about the Buddha teaching King Ajatasattu. King Ajatasattu had killed his father. There was no way that in this lifetime he would ever gain awakening. But the Buddha still gave him one of the longest Dhamma talks in the whole Pali Canon, out of compassion. So you have to have compassion for both sides.
Thank you.
I just happen to be I have another question. Thank you very much, Ajahn, for your insightful talk tonight. I'd like to ask about mindfulness and depression for lay people. Some lay Buddhists are not good at meditation. What can a lay person do who has moderate, mild depression? Not the biochemical type, but just the bad mental habits. What can be done? How can we apply mindfulness to the problem of depression for a lay Buddhist who's not good at meditation? Thank you.
Okay, you have to remember that basically depression is frustrated anger. You sense that you've come up against something where you feel that you cannot make a change and you feel powerless. That leads to depression. And so you have to keep reminding yourself, okay, there are areas where I can make a difference in my life. And you try to focus your attention there. There was a famous case in America. There was a philosopher, his name is William James. Do you know him?
The will to believe, yeah.
Yeah, will to believe. Okay, when he was young, he suffered from a severe depression because he wanted to be an artist. And his father made it clear there was no way he was going to be an artist. And so William James began to wonder if he had any free will at all. And the way he got out of his depression was to say, okay, my first act of free will is to believe in free will. And then okay, I'm good. Then I will do my best to make wise choices in areas where I realize I can make a difference. And that's how you get out of depression.
So the solution to depression then is to look at the root causes of the frustration.
Right, right.
Thank you, Ajahn.
Thanks.
Yeah, Ajahn, I want to ask about when we talk about dukkha, anicca, and anatta, and while we practice during our meditation or our daily life, we understand that all conditional things are impermanent. It keeps changing. Even if we meditate, also we can see the breathing in and out. It keeps changing. Short, long, hot, warm, cold. So everything is changing. So we know that it is anicca. And because it keeps changing, sometimes we cannot hold on to what we want. We understand that when there's something good we feel, but the next moment it changes. We cannot hold on. So this is called dukkha. We can't get what we want. And sometimes when there is a pain, we want it to get better, but it can't. So this is dukkha. And then because things keep changing, you don't have a core. You don't have a self. So it called non-self, anatta. Is it the correct way of understanding, Ajahn?
No.
Or maybe Ajahn can help.
That was the short answer. Now the long answer is before you give up on things being impermanent, suffering, and not self, you have to say, okay, what can I make that is more permanent? What can I make that is less suffering? What can I do to bring on things under my control? And this is the path that we have to follow. Because the Buddha never said there is no self, but he did say there are certain things that are not self, that are not worthy of causing a self. But in order to understand, okay, exactly where does the teaching of inconstancy, or I prefer the term inconstancy to impermanence, because inconstant means it's literally it's anicca is the opposite of nicca. Nicca means constant. Things are inconstant because they're going to change on you all the time. But the question is, if you're creating a path of practice, you don't focus on that. You focus on the things that you can make more constant. Like when you're trying to get the mind into concentration. And you find, okay, certain things I can't get in it, make more constant, but there's certain things I can. And the question is, how far can I push that? The same with ease and stress and ease. To what extent can I create a sense of ease? Okay, the breath may change, but I can still, it's like being a surfer. I can still ride the wave. I don't have to fall down. I can still maintain a sense of well-being, even though the breath changes, even though the body changes. Even though there are pains in the body, I don't have to focus on the pains. I can focus on the parts I can make comfortable. And there does come a sense of control. Now, ultimately you find that that can go only so far. But in the meantime, you've created a path. And things that would pull you off the path, those are the things where you concentrate, okay, this desire for something that is off the path, I can see that it is, it's untrustworthy, it's stressful. Why do I lay claim to it as my own? I can let go of that. You hold on to the path, but you let go of these other things. Remember the Buddha's image of a raft. You know, you make the raft. What do you make the raft out of? It's not the Nirvana yacht going to come over and pick you up from the other side of the river. You have to take the twigs and branches and leaves on this side of the river. In other words, you take your body, you take your feelings, you take all your aggregates, and you make them into a raft. You hold on to that raft. When you get to the other side, then you let go. But don't let go before. If you let go in the middle of the river, you drown. Okay? So in this way, you have to use things that are inconstant, stressful, not self, but you find, okay, there's an extent to which I can make them more constant, less stressful, more under control. And I use that path. That's how I get across. Then you let go. Because not self, the Buddha didn't say there is no self, but the term not self is a value judgment. It's not worth claiming to be my own. Now, when you're working on the path, it is worth claiming to be, okay, this is my path. I'm the one who's making the decisions. I'm the one who's going to benefit from this. These are skillful use of the sense of self. As the Buddha said, the self is its own mainstay. The self is its own governing principle. You have to have a strong, healthy sense of self in order to practice. Then you let go of that because it's a strategy for gaining happiness. Once you've gained the ultimate happiness, you don't need it anymore. I could give a whole talk on this topic.
Actually, how is the simple way of understanding anatta? I mean, if we practice,
Mhm.
dukkha and anicca looks to be a bit, if we can use the word
Mhm.
simple to understand
Mhm.
and feel it during our practice,
Mhm.
but anatta maybe is a bit
Well, anatta,
difficult.
we're constantly, as we go through life, we're already making this distinction between things that are worth calling mine, me or mine, and things that are not worth calling me and mine. It's a distinction we're making all the time. I mean, it starts when we're little children. Suppose you have a little sister. Somebody down the street is beating up on your little sister. She's your sister. You're going to defend her, right? She comes home. She starts playing with your toys and won't let you play with them. She's not your sister anymore. So this is something we've been doing all along. The Buddha is basically telling us, learn how to do it intelligently. Saying that, okay, this is not worth claiming as myself. I can let go. But these other things are worth claiming. I'll hold on to them for the time being. So see it as a value judgment. Because when the Buddha was asked, is there a self or is there no self? He didn't answer. He said, if you try to answer those questions, you get involved in what he calls a thicket of views, a writhing of views. In other words, if you try to answer that question, you just get tangled up.
Or is it when we analyze human, when we talk, when we do things, we understand that all human are four elements, element of wind, element of earth, water, and air. So by that understanding, can it better to understand the anatta, that what we talk
Again,
is
the Buddha
just,
doesn't define what you are. He says, if you try to define what a human being is, you limit them. You limit yourself, you limit other people. You're trying to push an answer to a question that the Buddha said is not worth answering.
maybe you need more practice to understand.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and I wrote a response to Bhikkhu Bodhi. Bhikkhu Bodhi wrote an article. And then I wrote a rebuttal to Bhikkhu Bodhi. Yeah.
Ajahn, I have two questions. what you said about harsh speech and how we should try to process it. One being that there's this kind of speech in the world, and it makes contact with the ear. I feel like I don't have enough mindfulness to process it in that way, and it just hits and becomes an emotional experience. So how would you advise to deal with it when it's like that?
Okay, you can ask yourself, one is the meditation helps slow things down so you can see the steps by which you take something and bring it in and start stabbing yourself. And so it's advisable to get better at your meditation. And in the meantime, as you catch yourself stabbing yourself, I really don't have to do this. And what part of me wants to do this? The Buddha says, in whatever defilement you have, it has an allure. There's something that you feel either for some reason you feel compelled to do this. And so you have to ask yourself, okay, what is the allure here? And it's going to be, many times it's difficult to find because it's something you don't like about yourself. But if you can gain enough stability that you can look at the mind and say, okay, I do have these unskillful habits. Maybe I can get past this.
My second question is about, I've been feeling quite a lot of disillusionment with the world, just jadedness from a lot of suffering. And I know that the path is the only way, but I have no motivation to elevate my practice, especially in meditation. So I was just wondering if you have any advice about that.
Well, you have to realize this is the only way out. It's through meditation. And you have to yourself, do I want to keep coming back to this again and again and again? Because part of the motivation has to overcome the sense of inertia that if I meditated harder, it would require more work. I just don't feel up to doing the work. But then you ask yourself, okay, do I have enough energy to continue coming back forever? No. So you learn how to talk to yourself that gives you more energy. You realize, okay, the easiest path is actually the path out. The path that stays in the world. That's, even though it may seem easy, it's going to entail a lot of suffering. So learn to see the path as easy.
John, I think in a lot of your talks, you've spoken about finding joy in the path and making it like play. So how do you advise to do that with meditation specifically?
Well, with meditation, it's easy. I mean, you can breathe in all kinds of different ways. You can think of the breath coming down from the top of the head, the breath coming up from the soles of the feet. You can ask yourself, when there's a pain in the body, if it feels like it's in the front, is it really in the front or is it actually in the back? Is my mind playing tricks on itself? And that way you begin to realize, you begin to explore how your mind can lie to itself. And this is one of the most fascinating things in the world. How the mind believes itself so thoroughly, even though when it's lying to itself. So you can look at it as a process and learning how to understand your mind. Get some joy out of that. And all the practice, I mean, generosity, you can play with all kinds of things. What would be an unexpected way of being generous? Something you wouldn't expect out of yourself. And use your imagination. Because the path is not just simply a matter of obeying the Buddha's instructions. Because so many of his instructions are basically challenges. He says, try this, try that, try this, try that. And he says, try to use your ingenuity. So find ingenious ways to be generous, find ingenious ways to meditate.
Thank you, Ajahn.
Hello, Ajahn. I'd like to ask a question. I know you're giving talks next week on aging, illness, and death. Unfortunately, I won't be able to be here. So my question is related to that topic. I ask for a permission to ask in advance. So this is in relation to my father. Lately, I've witnessed him going downhill in terms of his health. And one day, as in Singapore, we queue to buy food. So instead of him being able to queue as he normally would, I was the one having to queue for him, and then he was sitting down somewhere waiting. And at that moment, I was suddenly overwhelmed with a huge sense of sadness, and I found tears streaming down my eyes. And later on, I reflected this experience with a friend, and I said, I really felt sad. And upon reflection, I told my friend that I am experiencing grief, that my father is not what he used to be. And he's just going down, down, down. He's not the big fatherly figure that he was to me anymore. So I'm experiencing grief now and sadness now at that moment. My friend, who is also a Buddhist practitioner, she said, "You're not living in the present moment. He's not dead yet. Why are you grieving?" And I thought to myself, yeah, why am I grieving? He's not dead yet. But the fact of the matter was that I was really grieving and sad because who he was then is no longer who he is now. So I would like to ask, is this sadness and grieving wrong?
Okay, it's natural. The question is how to develop it in such a way so that you can get something positive out of it. And like that example I gave just now of thinking about this happens to everybody. And the fact that your father is still there means that there's still the opportunity for compassion that you can show to him. Because every relationship in the world is going to end at some point. And so you have to keep reminding yourself, okay, given the fact that this relationship is going to end, what is the most skillful thing that I can give to that person? How can I still show my generosity to that person? So here's your father still alive. He may not quite be the same person he was, but there's still positive things you can do with the relationship. And the more you can think in those terms, then when the relationship actually does end, there's a lot less self-recrimination. There's a lot less grief. We had a case recently at the monastery where one of the women who lived more or less permanently at the monastery passed away suddenly. And their family came when we did the ceremony for burying the ashes. And of the family members, the one who was crying the most was the one who had mistreated her the most. It's when you have the opportunity, okay, he's still alive. There's still ways that I can show my compassion to him. There's still ways that I can help him. Take advantage of the opportunity you have while you have it. And then when it inevitably goes, there's a lot less self-recrimination.
Thank you for that answer. And one of the other things that I experience is as I try to do whatever I can to make his quality of life better, I notice that whatever I can do is very limited. No matter how many times I take him to the doctor or different doctors, he still is not getting better. And so I feel very helpless and wondering, like, what I can't do anything for him.
Don't focus on the things you cannot do. Focus on the things you can. That may not be as much as you would want to do for him. It's okay. This is what the opportunity is right now. So take advantage of the opportunities that you do have.
I guess a part of me wants to alleviate his pain, and I find I cannot do that.
Yeah. And this is when you talk about the good things he's done in the past, and they talk about your gratitude toward him, the good things he did for you. And even though that cannot alleviate his physical pain, it really helps with the mental.
Thank you, Ajahn.
Ajahn, I would like to ask about Mindfulness 2.0 because you mentioned that mindfulness is we need to be proactively training the mind. So I kind of feel there are sometimes when the mindfulness is sharp, then we can notice how things as they are, and we like our we are not really disturbed by the external conditions. But there are also some times when the mindfulness is not there. And then I really feel like all the emotions, mixed feelings and stuff is going on inside me. Then after that, I realized that this is like a circle and it keeps going around and around and around. And I kind of feel frustrated when my mindfulness is not there. And then like my question is like, am I kind of trying too hard? Like, what do I need to do when I feel frustrated?
Okay, this is where it's good to think of your mind as being like a committee. And okay, you have your mindful members and you have your mindless members. And you can tell yourself, okay, my mindless members have been taking over for the time being. It's time for them to be a little bit more mindful. And so it's not just me all the time. It's okay, this member is mindless, but I don't have to let this person have control.
Okay.
I can let the more mindful and try to nourish the more mindful side. And that gets you out of that cycle of self-recrimination.
Thank you, Ajahn.
Perhaps we have time for one more question.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2 questions.
Yeah. Yeah, we've got 15 minutes. We've got 2
minutes. Okay.
Hello, Ajahn. You mentioned about the craft, building the craft. I noticed something. When people, I think you mentioned it a lot in your talk. Like when people view the word suffering, I think of the path is really hard, and there's this perception of feeling of I don't want to do it. So sometimes there's this craving for non-becoming, or just want to give up. But for me personally, I think is when we look into it, like the craft meaning, building the craft meaning life is actually worth living, and there's a lot we gotta do, like building, skillful quality in order to go forward. And yeah, I just want to hear your point of view about.
Okay, well, a lot of it has to do with how you talk to yourself. This is that verbal fabrication I was talking about earlier. When you talk to yourself about, okay, this seems difficult. How can I make it interesting? How can I, or if it seems like too big a job, how can I break it down into smaller jobs? Like you come back from work and you say, oh my gosh, a whole hour to meditate, I can't do that. And you tell yourself, okay, I'm going to just sit down in the meditation posture and I'm not going to make any promises about how long I'll stay. And I'll sit down and meditate and just sit in the meditation posture for a bit. And if I feel like continuing to meditate, I'll do it. And if I don't feel like meditating, I'll stop. And then sometimes you get into the meditation posture and you breathe nicely for 5 minutes and say, why would I ever want to leave? Other times you can tell yourself, okay, I want to stop, but gosh, it's embarrassing. I'm sitting and meditating. And I have this opportunity to meditate. Think of all the people in the world that don't have this opportunity. At least I have the opportunity. I should take advantage of it.
I think my also point is the lack of authenticity, the lack of like honesty within, for example, myself. Sometimes if I have that perception of like, oh, it's too much of hard work, but then I forgot the fact that I still have a lot of craving or even anger. And sometimes I kind of, a lot of people not trying to accept it and thinking that, oh, everything would be gentle, should be like gentle speech or breathing something in the body in term. But then I think that not really trying to accept that, oh, okay, we at maybe class 1, class 2, and that's step by step working toward that.
Okay, well, again, to think of yourself as a committee. And have you ever seen a mother hen trying to take care of all her chickens, the baby chicks? You have all these different members running around. And sometimes they're behaving themselves and sometimes they're not behaving themselves. And they say, okay, this is normal. And I'm meditating because of this. I'm not meditating to hide this fact or pretend that it's not there. This is why I'm meditating. Because my mind is kind of a mess. Learn how to accept that. But then, so I'm not going to stay here with a messy mind. I'm going to clean it up. And then in that case, then you say instead of focusing on the times when you've failed, focus instead on the small victories. It so much depends on how you talk to yourself about this. Or at the very least, Ajahn Mahabua has a nice comment. He says, it's like going into the ring and fighting. And you may lose, but at least you got into the ring and you fought. If you just go into the ring and lie down, how can you say you lost? you didn't even lose, you know. So you say, at least I'm putting up a fight. I may not be winning, but at least I'm putting up an effort. You encourage yourself that way.
Thank you, Thana Ajahn.
Yeah, good evening, Ajahn. Right, my question is, how does one overcome the fear in meditation when one feels that the body is like disappearing? Because I kind of like felt that, and then upon contemplation after the meditation, it just dawned on me that, hey, my body will disappear one day when I die, and that really frightens me. So whenever I thought about it, there is a lingering fear. So for your guidance, please. Thank you, Ajahn.
Okay, remind yourself you're better off without the body. You don't have to visit a doctor. You don't have to feed it. You don't.
Right. But the fear is there, as in like it's like oh, so it's like nothing, and then like you're not too sure what to think.
Okay, well, there are Brahmas who don't have bodies and they're perfectly happy.
Right. Okay, thank you, Ajahn.
Okay.
I guess it comes with practice.
No, I mean it's I mean if you get the breath still and the sense of the body disappears, then just take space as your object. It's not like there's nothing there. Space can be your object.
Right, because sometimes if you feel like you are dropping, it's like dropping into some emptiness, and feel just arise.
Mm-hmm. Okay, if there's a sense of dropping, you say, okay, if I don't have a body, there's nothing to drop.
Right. So I think upon contemplation, right, it just dawned on me that one is afraid to die, and then but sooner or later the day will come. Right. So yeah, in short, is like how can one like help yourself to think positively, to accept death?
Okay, the perception there again is important, because you know, if you're craving a body, you'll at the moment of death, the mind will just latch onto any body at all that it can find. And some bodies are better than others. And so I'd be better off if I felt that I did not have to latch onto a body. I still have my mind because I still have my mind. I'm still aware, because the awareness doesn't stop. The awareness keeps going. It's a process that continues whether there's a body or not. And so say, my most important possession is not my body. My most important possession is my awareness. Hold on to that.
Right.
Whatever happens.
Is it like living in the present?
Being in the present, but also again, what you're talking to yourself about in the present is going to be important. There's John Lee tells this great story of this slave who was working in a wealthy house, and one day he's actually allowed into the house, and he sees the dog who lives in the house is eating better food than he does. And he goes back home and he tells his wife, "Just, I wish I were born as a dog. Better off than being a human slave." And then of course, he has a heart attack and he dies. And he ends up being reborn as a dog. So be careful.
So going back to that question, I mean, do one like go back to the breath, or we just think of like the triple jam? Because death will definitely strike.
Okay, you hold on to the breath as long as the body's still alive. There comes a point where you have to let go of the breath. Now, one of the reasons we do breath meditation is because we learn about this process of fabrication that I talked about, verbal fabrication and mental fabrication, as we engage with the breath. And you'll be able to see the mind's talking to itself as it's dying. And you remind yourself, okay, I want to talk to myself in an intelligent way. This will make a big difference. So you hold on to that. You hold on to your sense of awareness.
Okay. Right. Thank you, Ajahn.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
Does anyone have any question? Oh.
Whoever gets it first. Okay.
Ajahn, thank you for coming back to
Mhm.
Singapore again.
Mhm.
But listening to you tonight, which is on mindfulness, there was a lot of suggestion of talking to your mind, talking to your own body, and almost suggestive of like auto-suggestion as a means of getting to the root of the problem or solving the problem. Is this what mindfulness is all about?
It's one of the things that mindfulness is all about. It's one of the processes of fabrication that you want to learn how to do skillfully. There's also the question of which perceptions you hold in mind. Like we talked about the perception of not self. When do you use that perception? When do you not use that perception? Mindfulness, again, these are things you want to learn either from what you've heard other people say or from what you've experienced in your own meditation, that you hold in mind as to what is skillful in any particular situation, what is not skillful, and how to judge. And this is why it's so frustrating reading about people saying mindfulness is about not judging. The Buddhism basically wants us to use our powers of judgment and to develop them so we use them wisely. And then mindfulness reminds us of what are the principles for wise judgment, and how do you recognize a situation which requires your judgment, and then how do you approach it? That's what mindfulness is for.
Thank you.
That's a good note. It's good note to end on.
Dramatic ending.
No more. Okay. Let's rejoice in the Dhamma that's given to us tonight. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Just two announcements. We've got the latest book that we printed for Thanachan's teachings. Some copies are up here in Chinese and English, two versions. Kamma Q&A. It is perhaps a very, very important book to read and to try and clarify what Kamma really is all about. Okay. And the other thing is next week, Tuesday, Wednesday, we've got two talks, Undaunted. Thanachan's book is available online. It's also titled Undaunted. It's really about being undaunted in the face of aging, illness, death. So it'd be good if you can read it before you come over. Yeah, okay. Right. Otherwise, let's bow and thank Phra Ajaan for teaching tonight. Krab. 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 Just remain.